These are the 10 best ways in the whole of old school RuneScape to make money, but they're not all equal in many more ways than in just terms of money. Some have almost no requirements, others require max stats and max gear, so I'm also going to be rating them to see how easy they are to do. And number 10 is completing the Corrupted Gauntlet, one that I personally really enjoy, but it wasn't always that way. It takes a while to learn and you're going to die quite a lot initially. If you ever did dungeoneering back in the day before 07, it's similar in a lot of ways to that one, but the dungeon part is much easier. There's no keys and you can go in any kind of way that you want. In this one, you gather resources to make armor and weapons with a 7.5 minute time limit before you get to fight the boss. The rooms are random, so in my opinion it just feels less repetitive, and as a result it's more fun than many other bosses. Plus, you can also practice by completing the normal version, which is easier with a bigger time limit and the boss has less health. The only problem really with the Corrupted Gauntlet is that it requires the Song of the Elf to be completed, and that requires quite a lot of stats at level 70, including a few slow skills like mining and agility. And realistically for this you want very high combat stats, and you need at least 2 different combat styles to kill the boss. But on the flip side, you don't need any gear at all, as you make it all in a dungeon, essentially making this the only top 10 method out of all of them where you can go in with absolutely nothing in your bank at all and make over 5 million GP per hour, and for that reason I put it in tier B. And number 9 is Commander Ziliana, allegedly, because I've also tested the kills per hour to see if the information given is correct, and this boss is notoriously slow to kill because you have to kite it around the room. The requirements for this boss are very low though, and you only need level 70 agility to get in, plus it can be done with combat stats in the 80s, possibly even the 70s, but obviously you get more money the higher stats because you do more kills per hour. And if you prefer, you can also kill the boss in a team, which makes it a very chill and easy boss to do. Now the wiki suggests that you can get 27 kills per hour at this boss, and whilst I don't have a T-bow for this, which is the method that they've used, I do have max combat stats and pretty much max gear apart from that. I think that's way overestimating, and I think you can probably get between 21 and 22 kills per hour with the T-bow, and even then, none of that even includes getting the ecumenical key or the 40 kill count needed to access the boss. So based on my calculations, it only works out to be 3 million GP per hour, and for that reason, it's going in F tier. For number 8, you're going to need to go into the wilderness, which makes it really difficult to actually calculate the money per hour, but the wiki thinks that killing Venenatus is almost 6 million GP. The beauty about this boss is it has almost no requirements at all. As long as you have protection prayers, which just require level 43, you will take almost no damage from this boss if it's done correctly. Of course though, it's not only the boss that you need to worry about, as she is above level 30 wilderness and in a multi-combat area. If a team logs in, realistically you're almost certainly dead, and if you're not used to PvP, a solo PK will probably kill you too, and there's an absolute ton of them here. I tried a 2000 level well just to see if I can get a few kills in, and I got just 3 kills before someone came along and this happened. Now I got extremely lucky here. I personally didn't bring a magic switch, which you can do to try and freeze your opponent and then log out, but if you do that you bring extra risk, and then if a team logs in, well, you're dead anyway. This account that happened to be waiting at the end of this tunnel, by the way, and froze the PK is not my old, and I have absolutely no idea why he was there. Each kill here took me 2 minutes, and the wiki suggests that you can get 26 kills per hour, which may be true if you could get more than 10 minutes without a PK interrupting you, but that is rarely going to happen. That money also doesn't factor in the loss from deaths, plus the 50k entrance fee that you need to pay, and if you don't do enough kills you lose if you leave the cave early. There is one type of player that could make a lot of money here though, but you don't really see videos on it. A good PK could, in theory, make a ton of money from the boss itself, but also by killing the PKs that come into them already skulled up because you hardly use any supplies, so you're going to be able to fight back if you want to. For the rest of us, once you include the deaths from PKs, or just simply being interrupted by them all the time, it's probably closer to 3 mil per hour. And for that reason, it's going in tier F. And number 7 is one of the Desert Treasure 2 bosses. So of course you need to complete the quest first, and it does have one of the longest quest chains in the entire game. You have to complete all of these quests just to be able to do it. Now the boss itself, Vordorvis, is the one that most players prefer to do, and once you have the strategy down you can take very little damage at this boss. However, the loot per hour that you get at this boss is being calculated on you literally being perfect at it, because it has a very unusual mechanism which gives you 50% extra loot from the standard drop table if you don't make any mistakes within the fight. With a bit of practice that is entirely possible, but even still, you know what it's like. Once you're doing a boss for a while, you kind of switch off and little mistakes creep in, so you're probably going to get a little bit less than that 6.3 million GP that the wiki suggests. It is quite a nice boss to learn and a lot of fun, but with all those quests needed first, I put this one into C. At number 6, we have Cykarl, a boss that I absolutely love, but most of old school RuneScape hates. I think mainly just because it's annoying to get into the boss where you have to kill 40 things first or get an ecumenical key, a little bit like trash in other games before you can actually kill the boss. However, I guess that is why it is almost 7 million GP per hour. In fact, it's crazy to think how long this has been out and how easy it is to get to for that kind of money. Because all you need is a decent range level and a decent defense level, plus either 60 strength or 60 agility in order to access Godwar's dungeon. Even the gear is not that expensive. You can come here and use barrows, plus a decent defensive shield, like a simple DFS for a few mil, and then black chins to kill the boss. Now the boss melee hits you if you target anything else apart from the boss for more than a few ticks. So it does take a while to get the timing right where you click on the minion to hit it once, and then you click on Cykarl. But honestly, just a couple of runs and you'll have this down. It's not too difficult at all. Ironically, if you watched my last video where I done 100 million from scratch in 24 hours, I got this on my second kill. But I did it for quite a while, and the hourly rate of 20 is about right, although it doesn't again include getting the ecumenical key or the kill count, so probably closer to about 18. Now the wiki's based its calculations using a Tumkin Shadow and completely max gear, but you get just as many kills per hour with black chins. The only difference really is that it costs you about an extra 1.2 million for the chins themselves. So chinning and getting around 18 kills per hour will probably make you between 4 and 4.5 million GP, which isn't the best, but even still, with the low requirements, is quite decent, so I'll put it in tier C. For number 5, we got our first raid, and even though the T-bow has gone up a ton and is a possible reward from this raid, this is currently the least profitable raid of all of them, but it will still get you a very tidy 8.6 million GP per hour. The Chambers of Xeric can be done in budget gear, solo, in teams. You can scale it to make it harder for a higher chance of a unique. It really doesn't matter, it's just about learning the mechanics for this one, and once you've done that, you're pretty much going to make a lot of money. This one also technically doesn't have any requirements, but good luck learning any raid without decent gear and decent stats. The thing I like personally about the Chambers of Xeric more than other things is that there's 8 bosses before Ulm, the final one, but you're only getting 3 or 4 per run, so it does change it up a little bit and it becomes less tedious in my opinion. It doesn't cost you a lot of money other than your gear because you make most of the supplies once you're in there, as long as you got the farming level and the herb lore level to do it. And there are strategies out there where you take no damage at all at the boss, although they do take a lot of practice. All in all, this is a raid, so good gear and stats do help a lot, but equally a lot of practice can get you a very long way here, and dedicating yourself to mastering this raid will likely see you in max gear before not too long. It was close to the S, but I think this one goes in the A tier. The fourth most profitable method in the whole of old school is the Theatre of Blood, and even with just a tent whip, you can make as much as 8 million GP per hour, and with a scythe it goes up to 9.6. Now all raids take a while to learn, but in the Chambers of Xeric, you can change the raid layout until you're happy with it. Plus you can solo it at your own speed and die as much as you want just learning the raid. But in TOB, it's much more unforgiving, especially if you try to solo it. The entry mode is just so much easier than the normal one, you end up brute forcing a lot of things, and in my opinion, you're just not really learning that much. There are, however, some really good discords that will help players learn it, and I recommend We Do Raids, which I'll link in the description. They run regular raids for beginners and help the community a ton. Anyway, don't let me put you off TOB, it's still a very good raid once you've mastered it, and the scythe drop can make you 1.2 billion GP. I just think the other 2 raids are better for different reasons, and because of that I'm going to put this one into B. And number 3 is the final raid, the Tombs of Amaska. The requirements to access this raid is pretty low with just a few quests needed, and it has one of the best learning mechanics in the entire game. When you first start off, you have no invocations activated at all, which are essentially things that you add into the raid to make it a little bit more difficult. Without any invocations active, the raid is very forgiving, and although you will probably die a few times like anything, it really doesn't take long before you know the basic mechanics and you can easily complete it. Only after you get to that point can you then start to add in a couple of invocations every time that you complete another raid. Whilst you're doing a raid with a few more invocations and you're concentrating on doing them, without even realising it, you become a master at all the other things that you're doing over and over again, and before you know it, your invocation's quite high and you're regularly getting purple chests. Gear and stats do help here but aren't essential, I did a lot of this in fresh start worlds, and with stats in the 80s and low 90s and just Barrow's gear, I was easily completing level 300 raids after a while. At that level, it's 6.9 million GP per hour currently, and if you keep at it, the loot will eventually get you to max gear, and with practice, if you can get to level 500 invocations, you could make a huge 15.2 million GP per hour, and for me, this has to go into tier S. You might be thinking at this point, what is going to be better money than raiding? Well, the next one is actually really simple. To access it, all you need to do is to kill all of the God Wars dungeon bosses just once, but you can even do that as a team if you prefer, as long as you're the one that deals the most damage. And then once you have all 4 pieces of the frozen key, you can access next. Those bosses require 70 agility, 70 strength, 70 range and 70 hit points, but not only is that all you need to access the boss, that's pretty much the only stats that you're going to need to kill it too. The other great thing about this boss is that for the gear, you could do this in Black D-Hard and a rune crossbow, and it's incredibly easy to learn because we have mass worlds for it. The boss dies so quickly in a mass, it doesn't even use half of the mechanics. As long as you do enough damage, you're going to get a split of the loot, and since a rune crossbow with Ruby Bolt's E can proc and hit 100, and the fact that the chance of that happening isn't based on gear or stats, it'll happen enough times on its own without you even trying to get a split almost every single kill. Now on Mass World you don't get as much per hour obviously, but it's still good money, and as you do it you naturally level up and learn the mechanics, and then you can go to a smaller team or a Mass World with just less players on it, and eventually after you master this boss you can then end up duoing it for a massive 17 million GP per hour. There's only one downside to this boss, and that I personally find it incredibly boring, but I can't put my personal feelings into this, so it has to go into tier S. Lastly, at number 1 spot is the Fortis Coliseum, and it will probably surprise you as to where the best moneymaker in the whole of old school RuneScape, according to the wiki, is ranked. First off, you can make 3.5 million per hour here just by completing Wave 1, and that can be done in Mystics with mid-level stats. And for the requirements involved in that is pretty amazing in itself. But completing Wave 12 can earn you as much as 17.3 million GP per hour, the most in the game, if you have max stats. Oh, and max gear. And you can prayer flick between 3 or 4 creatures attacking with different combat styles and take no damage. Now I ain't Wooks by any stretch, but I do consider myself a half decent player, and I spent 3 to 4 days straight at the Coliseum to create a guide on how to simplify the waves as much as possible, and to make it easier, and even still, I think I'm still dying about 1 every 3 or 4 runs. When you have 3 or 4 things attacking you at the same time and so many different combat styles, with 1 hit off prayer often killing you, it is one of the most unforgiving things I think I've ever done in the game. And when learning it, I died countless times, and each death costs 500,000 GP. Even now, doing it the safest method possible with the likely chance of getting a bad spawn reduced as much as possible, it still happens and it can kill you. The wiki also presumes you're getting a completion every 23 minutes, which would mean being out in the open killing the creatures most of the time in order to get the DPS for that time. So, whilst 0.01% of old school RuneScape players may be able to get over 17 million GP per hour here with max gear and max stats, from my experience, most players won't even get half of that. Plus, the price of the items that you can get as a drop currently from the Coliseum are still falling in price, so just a month or so from now, it's likely to be a lot less per hour. 17 million is possible though, even for just a small amount of players, so I can't downgrade it too much, and I put the best money maker in old school RuneScape into C. But what do you think? Am I being too harsh? Can the best money maker in old school RuneScape possibly be a C? Or any method in the top 10 be an F? Let me know.